Welcome to another episode of R&R Living Life. In this episode, Rick and I leave Onslow and make our way back to the Northwest Coastal Highway at Cairn and on towards the Shell-ready Karratha truck and travel stop. We were again passing the massive haul road construction work on the Peedymulla Road at the Port of Ashburton turnoff. We had considered taking the Peedymulla Road, but with the huge number of trucks and haul road work going on, decided to retrace our steps back to the highway. There is always something to see from viewing the countryside, mostly clay pan flats interspersed with floodways, from a different perspective. Even managing to see some cattle having a feed on the green pit beside the road in one of the floodways. I got to see more quad trucks today, and can now see why the turning lanes become passing lanes as we watched a quad pulling out onto the road at one point. Peedymulla Station was established in the 1880s and once carried 35,000 head of sheep. Almost 100 years later, after cyclones, floods, droughts, 7 owners and restocking with cattle, the current owners since 1973, the Commonwealth Government, still operate the station as a cattle station and an occasional training facility for Aboriginal people, as well as offering a campsite for travellers. In 1924, the area was struck by a cyclone, with 40 windmills being destroyed at Peedymulla, followed by drought resulting in further stock losses. Living on the land is always boom or bust depending on the season and what Mother Nature throws at you. The majority of the property is composed of spinifex country, with areas of cracking clay found on the eastern side. The sand ridges and plains were impressive. We crossed the Cairn River with headwaters that rise west of the Hamersley Range, flowing in a northwesterly direction through Cairn River Conservation Area and through 226,000 hectares of Peedymulla Station, then over the Onslow coastal plain, eventually discharging into the Indian Ocean near Yardie Landing, approximately 35 kilometres northeast of Onslow. The entire river delta is found within the boundaries of Peedymulla Station, but sadly the delta had become degraded as a result of overgrazing, particularly prior to 1970, when the station was running 100,000 head of sheep. Since operating as a cattle station, measures have been taken to improve the quality of the delta. In 2013, there were a total of 527 pastoral leases in Western Australia. All leases were put up for renewal or surrender. In 2015, with current lease terms ranging from 21 years to 50 years. Nearly 90 million hectares, or 36% of the area of Western Australia, is covered by these stations. We passed more of the construction of the haul road alongside the Peedymulla Road just before Peedymulla East Creek, with a 4-metre floodway sign and very, very long floodways either side, before crossing Robe River. I can only imagine what it would be like when floods or heavy rain in the area fill these rivers. We passed Mount Minnie with an elevation of 218 metres, surrounded by Mount Minnie Station, another pastoral lease that once operated as a sheep station before making the switch to cattle. The station takes its name from the nearby Minnie Creek. In this dry part of Western Australia, only gnarled desert trees and thorny bushes grow. Like many other stations in the area, Minnie Creek was badly affected by the drought years between 1936 and 1942, with sheep numbers drastically decreased. Other pastoral leases in the area, first leased in the late 1870s, were Yarraloola and Deepdale Station, that ceased being a station in its own right, becoming part of Yarraloola. Situated close to the coast, Yarraloola had its own landing north of Robe River for the export of the wool clip. Keith Patterson built the homestead in 1919, but it was not an easy task, as many delays occurred with the building supplies, many of which had to be brought in from overseas. In the 1920s, transport improved with the introduction of motor vehicles, but roads were rough and teams of camels, donkeys and horses were still used for a number of years carrying large loads. Around mid-morning we stopped at Fortescue Roadhouse, bordered by the Hamersley Range, before crossing the Fortescue River, the third longest river in Western Australia. The river rises about 30 kilometres south of Newman near Deadman Hill in the Opothalamia Range, flowing in a northerly direction before crossing the Great Northern Highway just south of the Marble Bar turnoff. Then it runs north-west, then west, crossing the highway again north of Usker Roadhouse. Approximately 100 kilometres north of Newman, the river flows into a 960 square kilometre Fortescue Marsh, an important wetland, before continuing on to cross the highway at the Fortescue Roadhouse, until it finally discharges into the Indian Ocean at Mardy Station, about 40 kilometres southwest of Dampier. The Fortescue catchment area uses the trough between the Chichester Plateau on the southern side that rises abruptly from the coastal plain and is composed of rolling hills, escarpments, jagged peaks, gorges and winding tree-lined watercourses, and the northern side of the Hamersley Range, one of the oldest mountain ranges on Earth, primarily consisting of ancient rock formations billions of years old. The valley plains are composed of earthy clays, with some cracking clays, loam and hard red soils. Around midday we passed Devil Creek Gas Plant on 40 Mile Beach Road. The Devil Creek Development Project is a greenfield project that recovers and processes gas reserves from the offshore Reindeer gas field, approximately 80 kilometres northwest of the port of Dampier. The Reindeer raw gas pipeline transports gas from the normally unmanned Reindeer wellhead platform through a 105 kilometre offshore and onshore pipeline that connects to the Devil Creek gas plant, approximately 10 kilometres inland from 40 Mile Beach. After the raw natural gas has been processed at the Devil Creek gas plant, it is delivered to the Bunbury Natural Gas Pipeline on the Burrup Peninsula near Dampier, before being pumped approximately 1,600 kilometres to Brunswick near Bunbury in the southwest of Western Australia. The corridor also includes land for various high-pressure pipeline laterals to service areas such as Carnarvon, Geraldton, Pinjarra, Kawana, Waroona and Harvey. Later that afternoon we parked up at the Shell-Ready Roadhouse and truck stop, where we unhooked Gidget and made our way into Dampier. The road from the roadhouse out to Dampier runs through desert landscapes and at one point runs for kilometres beside the huge salt pans, which are part of Dampier Salt Company's activities, and then past Holcomb Nickel Bay Quarry. The Dampier Salt operation, now part of mining giant Rio Tinto, was established in 1967 and currently produces somewhere in the vicinity of 4.2 million tonnes per annum. Our first stop in Dampier was at the Welcome to Dampier information panels, where I had my first sighting of the Sturt Desert Pea, which I later learnt can be found in arid parts of Australia except Victoria, and grows in red, sandy or loamy soils in mulga woodlands, near creek lines and on stony hills, though can be found sometimes in woodland and open plains. The Red Dog statue was also at the information panels. Red Dog, also known as the Pilbara Wanderer, is believed to have been born in Paraburdoo in 1971, and his first owner, Col Cummins, named him Tally-Ho. When Cummins moved to Dampier, Tally-Ho took off and spent most of his time at the Hamersley Iron Transport Centre, where he befriended a bus driver. After the bus driver was tragically killed, Red Dog, as he became known, had a series of owners and lengthy periods travelling on his own, travelling throughout the entire region from Perth to Broome to Port Hedland. However, his exceptional homing instinct always returned him to Dampier or Karratha. Sadly, Red Dog is believed to have been deliberately baited in 1979. The red rocks and hills as we arrived in Dampier were stunning. Dampier takes its name from explorer William Dampier, who visited Western Australia twice, first in 1688 and the second from 1699 to 1701. While these visits were 70 to 80 years before James Cook visited Australia's east coast, they were still tens of thousands of years after Indigenous Australians made the Dampier archipelago and the Burrup Peninsula their home. It was Dampier's journals that led to British interest in the Great Southern Land and subsequently European settlement 100 years later. Dampier has over 3,700 hours of annual sunshine, with the region one of the sunniest places in Australia. It was constructed in 1965 as a port and processing centre for Hamersley Iron's inland Pilbara iron ore mines, with the port of Dampier opened in 1966, when the first iron ore from the Hamersley project's Mount Tom Price mine was transported via the Hamersley Railway to Parker Point for shipment. 5 decades later, Dampier is the second largest bulk export port in the world, shipping iron ore, salt, liquefied gas and hydrogenous ammonia from dedicated terminals as well as other cargo. Over 4,500 vessels visit the port each year. We drove along the esplanade where we could see ships loading, and from the lookout the huge trains that brought iron ore to the port. The Dampier salt facility was completed in 1972 and is the largest of Dampier's salt operations, which also include Port Hedland and Lake McLeod. From Dampier Lookout we could view the Rio Tinto's Dampier salt operations, produced from seawater which flows through a series of ponds, and where I learnt more about salt production. Things progressed swiftly in this part of Australia. For example, in 1963, Hamersley Iron, or Rio Tinto, began development of Mount Tom Price. In January 1965, construction commenced, and in just 20 months, Hamersley Iron had constructed a port, a railway and a mine, and had made significant headway in planning and construction of 2 major towns. The first contracted load of 52,000 tonnes of iron ore bound for Japan left the port in August 1966. In 1984, the Karratha gas plant, which forms part of Woodside-operated North West Shell project, commenced operation, supplying gas into the Western Australian market. The plant also provided liquid natural gas, LNG for customers in the Asia-Pacific region and other parts of the world, shipping its first LNG cargo to Japan in 1989. It also produces liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, oil and concentrate, a light crude oil for international energy markets. We finished exploring Dampier and then returned to Karratha, located on Nickel Bay, where we went to the lookout with views over the town and the bay. Karratha was created to provide accommodation and services for the employees of Hamersley Iron, Robe River Associates, the Dampier Salt Company, and the workers on the North West Shelf Gas and Petroleum Project. Karratha takes its name from the Karratha Station, which was established in 1866. It has now grown to be the largest township in the Pilbara, nearly twice the size of Port Hedland, and accounts for about 40% of the region's total population, with around 17,000 people. The town is driven by the high-paying mining industry, and consequently everything is about 50% more expensive than it would be in a non-mining town. Just as well we were well stocked and didn't need anything. From the lookout we also had a great view of St. Paul's Catholic Church, with its impressive 37-metre-high copper-coated spire, with 24 glass windows at the base of the spire, just as impressive when we drove past it later on our way into the town centre. After exploring Karratha, we made our way back to Gidget and rehooked, ready for travelling again. Though there were a lot of trucks during the night, it really wasn't noisy, and both Rick and I had a good night's sleep. The following day we made our way towards Roebourne, the oldest settlement between Geraldton and Darwin, about 30 kilometres south of Karratha, via DeWitt Road. On our way to Roebourne, we passed on the driver's side Mount Mari, a landscape of spinifex hills, escarpments and tree-lined watercourses, while on the passenger side were floodplains and the Nickel River Delta. The Pilbara region was explored by Francis Thomas Gregory in 1861. He and his exploration party arrived at the head of Nickel Bay, landing near what was to become Roebourne, and travelling about 60 kilometres inland to present-day Millstream Station. Gregory regarded the area as highly suitable for pastoral settlement. The first British settlers, including Gregory's cousin Emma Withnell and her young family, who arrived in the Roebourne area in 1863. The Withnells established themselves on the banks of the Harding River, 13 kilometres from the coast, where they had access to a reasonably fresh water supply, and took up 120 square kilometres at the foot of Mount Welcome. In common with many settlers at the time, they hired local Aboriginal people to work on their properties as shepherds, labourers and shearers. The town of Roebourne was gazetted at this location in 1866, the first town to be established in the northwest region. We climbed Water Tower Hill to Mount Welcome Lookout, with 180-degree views around Roebourne and the surrounding hinterland. We saw the Holy Trinity Church, built in 1894, one of the oldest churches in the northwest constructed from local stone. The lookout also had 6 Aboriginal silhouette statues representing the tribes in and around Roebourne, all standing respectfully on one leg with spears, each one facing their homeland. On the horizon we could just make out Dixon Island and the cargo ships waiting or departing the port at Point Sampson. On the way down I found it amusing seeing a grasshopper in amongst the red rocks. What grasshopper, you might ask? That one on the red rock. Which red rock, you might ask, as they were all red? It took me a while before I could find it, as it was so well camouflaged. Rick and I had a good laugh about who was blinder, him or me. We passed the old Roebourne Jail, comprising the Roebourne Police, Courthouse and Jail Precinct, with construction commencing in 1896, with stone being quarried and laid by Aboriginal prisoners who were detained there in extremely harsh conditions between 1896 and 1923. Dry stone retaining walls were constructed in the 1890s to separate the differing levels of the precinct. We will leave you for this episode as we leave Roebourne and make our way further towards Port Hedland. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Join us next time as we explore Port Hedland. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, living life.